What happens when a royal scandal collides with a razor-sharp interviewer under the unforgiving glare of live television? Tonight, millions were about to find out. This was not just another celebrity sit-down. This was the beginning of an unforgettable clash between Meghan Markle and Piers Morgan, an interview that began with polite smiles and ended in barely contained chaos. By the time the segment concluded, the audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Producers were whispering urgently behind the cameras, and Piers Morgan would be facing one of the most difficult decisions of his broadcasting career. The studio lights blazed overhead like 1,000 watchful eyes, bathing the set in an artificial glow that mirrored the tension hanging thickly in the air. Every surface gleamed. Every shadow felt deliberate. The familiar theme music faded out, and the camera slowly zoomed in on Piers Morgan. He adjusted his tie with practiced confidence, his posture relaxed but alert. The look of a man who had weathered storms before and was ready for another. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back," he began smoothly, his voice calm, measured, and unmistakably in control. "Tonight, I'm joined by Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, or, as she now prefers to be known, Meghan, independent entrepreneur and advocate." Polite applause filled the studio, though it lacked warmth. Several audience members exchanged uneasy glances, as if bracing themselves for impact. Meghan entered from stage left. Her white silk blouse caught the studio lights, just enough to shimmer beneath a sharply tailored black blazer. Every detail of her appearance seemed intentional, curated. She walked toward her chair with steady confidence, her smile small, composed, and faintly knowing, like someone who believed the outcome of the conversation was already decided. Piers rose to greet her, extending his hand. "Thank you for being here." "Of course," she replied, her voice light as she took her seat and crossed her legs with careful elegance. "Happy to clarify a few things. Please, people do seem perpetually confused about me." The words were polite. The tone was not. Beneath the calm delivery was a faint edge, something sharper, almost amused. Piers chuckled softly. "Let's see if we can clear that confusion tonight." He glanced down at his notes, then back up. "Let me start with what everyone wants to know: our departure from the royal family. Do you regret leaving, or do you feel it was inevitable?" Meghan tilted her head slightly, blinking slowly, as though the question barely deserved her attention. "Well," she said coolly, "if you'd been paying attention, you'd know I left because I had better things to do with my life than play. Dress up for the tabloids." A ripple ran through the audience. A few gasps, nervous laughter. Someone shifted audibly in their seat. Piers didn't flinch, so he replied evenly, "You see the monarchy as a spectacle rather than a duty? I think waving from balconies and curtsying on command is hardly what I'd call duty," she said, lips curling into a faint smirk. He nodded, scribbling briefly on his notepad. "And yet," continued, "that institution has existed for centuries, upheld by people who believe it represents service, responsibility, and continuity. Do you believe those who stayed Prince William, Princess Catherine are wasting their lives?" "It's not my problem," Meghan said, adjusting her cuff. "If they enjoy it, good for them. Some people thrive on irrelevance." This time, the murmur from the audience was louder. A few heads shook. A producer near the edge of the set stiffened. Piers' voice remained steady. "And yet, Meghan, you benefited from that same irrelevance when you married into it. Do you feel you owe the institution or the public any respect?" She laughed lightly, though the sound felt rehearsed, polished. "Oh, please," she replied. "I gave them relevance, brought color literally and metaphorically." The reaction was immediate. Sps. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the front row. Piers raised an eyebrow, letting the moment breathe. "Well," he said finally, "you're certainly not shy about your opinions." He leaned forward slightly. "Talk about your relationship with the press," many critics say. "You court publicity when it suits you and condemn it when it doesn't. How do you respond to that?" Meghan leaned in too now, her eyes locking onto his. "I'd say," she began slowly, "that people like you need to learn the difference between accountability and obsession." The temperature in the studio seemed to rise. Piers smiled, but It didn't reach his eyes. Interesting. Because from where many viewers sit, it looks like you're eager to tell your story just not to be questioned about it. Her smile tightened. Questioning is fine, she replied. Distortion is not. And you, Piers, have made a career out of distortion when it comes to me. A hush fell over the room. He didn't interrupt. That, perhaps, unsettled her more than any challenge. So let me ask you this, he said calmly. If the royal family was so damaging, so insignificant, why does your narrative still revolve around it? For the first time, Meghan paused. Not long, but long enough, because, she said carefully, people refuse to let it go. Piers nodded slowly, or because it won't let you go. The audience shifted again. Somewhere off camera, producer glanced nervously at the clock. The polite interview was gone now. What remained was something raw, unpredictable, and dangerously compelling. And as the cameras kept rolling, one thing was clear: this was no longer about royalty, reputation, or press narratives. This was about control. And only one person in that studio was truly comfortable letting silence speak. I'd say, she began, leaning forward just slightly, that people like you need to learn the difference between privacy and secrecy. But then again, if you truly understood that difference, you wouldn't have built a career out of pestering people. The jab landed hard. A visible ripple ran through the audience. A few people winced. Someone in the second row let out an involuntary breath. Even the camera operator shifted, sensing the moment tipping from spirited debate into open confrontation. Piers Morgan, however, barely reacted. He smiled faintly, an expression honed through years of political interviews, celebrity meltdowns, and public outrage. It was the smile of someone who had been insulted far worse and survived every time. If that's how you feel, Meghan, he replied calmly, folding his hands on the desk, then this is going to be a fascinating evening. And just like that, the temperature in the room rose. When tension simmers just beneath the surface, it doesn't take much for the mask to slip. The air felt heavier now, charged with anticipation. Producers exchanged glances behind the cameras. This was no longer a routine interview. This was something else entirely. Tonight, Meghan Markle's carefully curated poise began to crack under Piers Morgan's unflinching gaze. And the studio seemed to feel it collectively. By the time the segment was nearing its midpoint, it wasn't just Meghan who looked uncomfortable. The audience shifted restlessly in their seats, unsure whether they were meant to applaud, gasp, or remain perfectly still. The usual cues felt useless now. This wasn't entertainment in the familiar sense. It was confrontation. The cameras rolled on. Meghan adjusted the lapel of her black blazer with a sharp, practiced movement. Her smile tightened, growing more rigid. By the minute, the white silk blouse beneath shimmered under the studio lights, immaculate and flawless. Yet her expression betrayed a flicker of irritation she could no longer fully suppress. Across from her, Piers leaned back in his chair, flipping through his notes with deliberate care. He wasn't rushing. He never did. Silence, he knew, was often more unsettling than accusation. Let's talk about Harry, he said at last, his voice soft but deliberate. The studio seemed to inhale. You and Prince Harry's relationship has been the subject of worldwide fascination, he continued, eyes locked onto hers with quiet determination. Many people feel he has changed significantly since meeting you. Some even say he's distanced himself from his family because of you. How do you respond to that? Meghan's eyes narrowed just a fraction. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Her voice, when she spoke, was syrupy sweet. Oh, Piers, she said lightly. I'm sorry you're so invested in someone else's marriage. A pause. Are you happy at home? She added. Do you even have a wife? Asked the audience collectively. Inhaled. A few gasps slipped through the silence. One person audibly muttered, "Oh my God." This was no longer veiled hostility. This was personal. Piers didn't flinch. Happily married? Thank you, he replied evenly, the faint smile never leaving his face. But we're here to talk about you and Harry, not me. Meghan shot back immediately. Of course you are, she continued coolly, leaning back now. 'Cause people like you always need a villain to keep your ratings up. How quaint. The words were sharp, calculated, to provoke. Piers ignored the jab entirely. Many royal watchers, he pressed on, say Harry has become more isolated, more angry, more withdrawn since leaving the UK. Do you feel any responsibility for that? Meghan let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, you really believe everything you read in the tabloids, don't you? She said, her tone suddenly cutting. He's happier than he's ever been. I'm sorry if that ruins your narrative. A ripple of unease passed through the audience again. Piers tilted his head slightly. Happier, he repeated. Estranged from his father, distant from his brother, living thousands of miles away from the life he once defended publicly. Happiness can look many ways, Meghan. Her jaw tightened. What it looks like, she snapped, is freedom. Something you and your institutionally loyal friends wouldn't understand. Piers leaned forward now, resting his forearms on the desk. Freedom, he echoed. Or isolation. For the first time that evening, Meghan hesitated. Not long. Just long enough, her eyes flicked briefly toward the audience, then back to him. You're framing this as though Harry was stolen, she said carefully. As though he had no agency. That's insulting to him. I agree, Piers replied, which is why I'm asking about influence, not control. The word hung between them. Influence. Meghan's single quotes a smile returned, but it was brittle now. Really enjoy this, don't you? She said, poking at people's lives from behind a desk. I enjoy answers, Piers replied simply, especially when questions make people uncomfortable. A murmur rippled through the studio. Meghan shifted again in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her composure no longer effortless. The audience could feel it, the slow erosion of certainty. It's a pressure of sustained scrutiny. So let me ask you plainly, Piers continued. If the royal family was so toxic, so irrelevant, why does your story still orbit around it? Her lips parted, then pressed together. Because, she said finally, people like you won't let it go. Piers nodded slowly, or he said quietly, because it won't let you go. Silence, no applause, no laughter. Just a stillness so thick it felt physical. Somewhere off camera, a producer glanced at the clock. The segment was running long. No one dared cut it short. The polite interview was gone. What remained was raw, unscripted, and dangerously compelling. And as the cameras continued to roll, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no longer about royalty. It was about power. And only one person in that studio seemed completely comfortable letting the silence do the talking. The studio lights burned hot, but the air between them felt cold enough to sting. Piers Morgan sat upright behind the desk, shoulders squared, his expression carefully neutral. It was the kind of calm that didn't soothe a room, but warned it. Across from him, Meghan Markle reclined slightly in her chair, arms crossed tight across her chest. Lips curved into a knowing smirk that suggested she believed she was winning. Something invisible. You know, Piers said at last. His voice measured, almost gentle. I came into this interview hoping for an honest conversation, not a performance, not a rehearsal of grievances. An actual discussion about the choices you've made and the legacy you're trying to build. He paused, letting the words settle. The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing the shift. This wasn't banter anymore. This wasn't one of those polished, polite television exchanges where both sides pretend to listen while protecting their image. This was something sharper, but it's becoming increasingly clear, he continued, eyes fixed on Meghan, that honesty isn't really what you're interested in. What I'm seeing instead is the same tired routine, flecked, dismiss, and insult anyone who dares to push back. Meghan's smirk widened. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused rather than challenged, crossed her arms more tightly. Oh, please, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Spare me the self-righteous lecture. You're just mad I'm not crying into your shoulder like the rest of your guests. The words landed like glass shattering. The audience fell completely silent. No gasps, no murmurs, just a sudden heavy stillness, as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate before adjusting their angles. Somewhere off stage, a producer's jaw tightened. Piers didn't react immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt, simply sat there, fingers tapping once, just once against the polished surface of the desk. The camera zoomed in on his face, catching the stillness in his eyes. The way his jaw set, just slightly tighter than before. "Well," he said finally, his voice deceptively calm, "I think we've given you more than enough time tonight, too. Show the world who you really are." He paused again, and this time the pause felt deliberate, surgical, and you haven't disappointed. Meghan arched an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair, clearly pleased with herself. To her, it looked like victory. She wore the expression of someone who believed she had outplayed the room, who mistook provocation for power. Piers offered the faintest smile, brief, controlled, and utterly joyless. "Let's take another break," he said quietly. The cameras cut to commercial, but not before they captured the glint in his eyes, something sharp, something dangerous, something that suggested the real confrontation hadn't even started yet. When the broadcast returned, the atmosphere in the studio had changed entirely. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the moment before a storm breaks. Meghan sat stiffly now, arms folded in defiance, her posture less relaxed than before. Piers remained outwardly composed, but there was fire in his eyes, a restrained intensity that signaled this segment would not be a continuation, but a reckoning. What had begun as a high-profile interview had quietly transformed into a slow-motion implosion. The red light on the main camera blinked back to life. The audience, still uneasy, offered a half-hearted round of applause that faded almost instantly. No one smiled. No one shifted comfortably in their seat. Meghan adjusted the sleeves of her crisp, white blouse beneath a sharply tailored black blazer, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. Her chin remained high, her expression carefully controlled, but the ease she had worn earlier was gone. In its place was rigidity defense, masquerading as confidence. Piers leaned slightly forward, folding his hands neatly on the desk in front of him. His trademark smile, the one audiences had come to expect, was nowhere to be found. Instead, his mouth formed a tight, unwavering line. "Welcome back," he said evenly, but his voice carried weight now. "Finality. We're here with Meghan Markle," he continued, "though it seems the conversation we hope to have tonight is taken quite a turn." Meghan rolled her eyes, just enough for the cameras to catch it. "This is exactly what I mean," she said. "You push, I respond, and suddenly I'm the villain." Piers didn't flinch. "No," he replied calmly. "What you've done tonight is something else entirely. You've dismissed questions, ridiculed accountability, and treated genuine criticism as a personal attack. And when that didn't work, you reached for mockery." A ripple of discomfort passed through the audience. "This isn't about tears," he went on. "It's about responsibility. It's about recognizing that influence comes with consequences." Meghan leaned forward now, her voice sharper. "You don't get to define my responsibility." "You're right," Piers said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "I don't. But the public does, and so does history." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. In that moment, everyone in the studio understood something unspoken. This interview would be replayed, dissected, argued over for years, not because of what was shouted, but because of what was revealed in the spaces between words. And long after the cameras shut off, long after the applause lights dimmed, this moment would linger, not as entertainment, but as a warning about what happens when control slips and truth refuses to be managed. Meghan rolled her eyes so dramatically that a few members of the audience actually gasped. The movement was exaggerated, theatrical, and unmistakably dismissive, as if she wanted everyone watching both in the studio and at home to know exactly how little she respected what was happening. "Oh, don't act like you're surprised, Piers," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is exactly the kind of gotcha spectacle you live for, isn't it? You poke, you provoke, and then you pretend to be shocked when someone bites back." A low ripple moved through the audience. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others shifted uneasily in their seats, Sensing the conversation slipping into dangerous territory, Piers tilted his head slightly, studying her, not angrily, but with a kind of focused curiosity, like a man trying to understand whether he was witnessing defiance or evasion. "Actually, Meghan," he replied evenly, "what I live for is asking real questions and getting real answers, something you seem determined not to give." Her lips curled into a smug smile, slow and deliberate. She clasped her hands loosely in her lap, exuding the confidence of someone who believed she had the upper hand. "Maybe," she said coolly. "That's because your questions aren't worth answering." The reaction was immediate. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed too loudly. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice muttered, "Wow," barely above a whisper, yet loud, enough to be heard. Piers inhaled deeply, the breath visible in the rise of his chest. For a moment, it looked as though he was calculating, deciding whether to push forward or let the moment pass. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. It was firmer now, more deliberate. "All right," he said. "Let's try one more time." Leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on the desk, closing the physical distance between them without raising his voice. "Earlier tonight, said you left the royal family because you felt trapped, stifled, suffocated by the institution." "Fine," he continued. "But do you ever reflect on the fact that you knew or should have known what you were walking into? Do you take any responsibility for that choice?" Meghan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Ah, yes," she said. "The classic blame the woman narrative. She should have known her place. She should have stayed quiet." How original. Okay. A murmur spread through the crowd, some nodding along, others frowning. "This isn't about place," Piers said firmly, leaning in further now. His patience was thinning, and it showed. "This is about accountability. Do you take any?" "I take accountability," she snapped back, "for not letting that institution destroy me." "Does that count?" The audience murmured again this time louder. A few clapped instinctively before stopping themselves. Others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they were witnessing empowerment or deflection. Piers pressed his lips together, nodding slowly as if filing her answer away. "Very." "Well," he said, "then let's talk about Harry." The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. "Many people," he continued carefully, "say he's not the man he used to be. That he's cut ties with friends, with family, with his country largely, because of your influence. Do you feel any remorse for how isolated he's become?" For the first time that night, Meghan's smirk faltered. It was brief, barely a second, but the cameras caught it. Her eyes hardened, her jaw tightening, as if a nerve had been struck. "Oh, please," she said sharply. "Harry made his own choices. He's a grown man, not some puppet dangling from my strings. But of course you'd assume otherwise. Anything to paint me as the Wicked Witch?" "That's not what I said," Piers replied, his voice sharpening for the first time. "But you do seem awfully defensive about it." She leaned forward now, her posture suddenly aggressive, her voice dropping to a low, mocking tone. "Defensive?" she said. "No, Piers. I just don't feel the need to sit here and justify my marriage to you of all people." Then tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Are you jealous?" she asked. "Is that what this is about?" The studio erupted in gasps, audible, unfiltered. Even members of the production crew froze. For a split second, Pierce's eyes widened, in anger, but in disbelief at the sheer audacity of the comment. He straightened in his chair, shoulders pulling back, reclaiming his composure with visible effort. "Jealousy," he said slowly, "has absolutely nothing to do with this." He looked directly into the camera now, breaking the fourth wall. "What does concern me," he continued, "is when personal deflection replaces meaningful dialogue. When serious questions are dismissed as personal attacks, and when anyone, royal or not, refuses to accept that actions have consequences beyond their own feelings." Meghan leaned back again, arms crossed tightly, her face set like stone. "You don't get to judge my life," she said coldly. "No," Piers replied, "but the public does, and so does time." Silence fell again, suffocating, unmistakable. The audience didn't move. No applause, no murmurs. Just the quiet hum of studio equipment and the faint awareness that something irreversible had just happened. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a fracture. A moment where control slipped, where masks cracked, where intention collided with perception. And long after the red light faded, long after the cameras shut down and the chairs were pushed back, this exchange would live on rewound. Replayed, debated endlessly. Not because of what was said loudly, but because of what could no longer be unsaid. "I think we're done here," Piers said quietly. The words weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. That's exactly what made them dangerous. Meghan tilted her head, slow, deliberate motion, the corners of her mouth lifting into a way. Smile that suggested she was enjoying every second of this unraveling. To her, it still felt like a game. "Oh," she said lightly, "what happened to your tough questions? Run out of steam?" Piers didn't answer right away. He stood. The movement alone sent a jolt through the studio. Chairs creaked as people instinctively shifted. The audience fell into complete silence. Not a whisper, not a breath. Even the cameraman froze for a fraction of a second, unsure whether to follow the motion or stay locked on Meghan's face. "No," Piers said at last, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "What I've run out of is patience." Meghan's smirk faltered, just slightly. It was the first visible crack in her composure. Surprise flickered across her face before she masked it again. "You came here," Piers continued, standing tall now, his presence filling the room with an opportunity. A platform millions of people would kill for. A chance to tell your story, to answer real questions about the choices you've made. His voice remained calm, but it was laced with steel. Instead, you've spent the past hour being smug, dismissive, and quite frankly, insulting. Not just to me, but to everyone watching at home. Meghan opened her mouth to respond. Piers raised a hand. "Save it," he said sharply. The authority in that single word was unmistakable. "I've interviewed prime ministers, presidents, actual royalty," he went on. "People who disagreed with me, sometimes fiercely, but still managed to sit here and answer questions like adults." He shook his head slowly, almost disappointed. "But you," he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle, "have mistaken this studio for your Instagram page. You seem to think you can control every word, every angle, every narrative." The audience remained frozen, eyes darting between the two figures locked in this confrontation. No one dared look away. "You want to play the victim?" Piers continued, his voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the studio. "Fine. You want to play the misunderstood hero? Be my guest." He leaned forward slightly, "but not on my show." The words hit like thunder. "I will not sit here," he said, "and allow you to insult my profession, my audience, or my intelligence any longer." He straightened. "You can leave now." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Meghan's eyes flashed. For a split second, it looked like she might argue. The tension coiled tight, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then she laughed. It was dry, humorless. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unhooked her microphone. The faint click echoed louder than it should have. She stood, smoothing her blazer, reclaiming her posture as though this, too, were part of her plan. "Well," she said coolly, adjusting the fabric at her shoulders, "at least now everyone's seen the real Piers Morgan." She looked down at him with thinly veiled contempt, bitter, small, predictable. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Piers didn't blink. "And now," he replied without missing a beat, his tone perfectly measured, "they've seen the real Meghan Markle." He paused, arrogant, entitled, and worst of all boring. Reaction was immediate and visceral. The audience gasped as one. Meghan's lips tightened into a thin, furious line. Without another word, she turned on her heel. Her heels clicked sharply against the studio floor as she strode toward the exit, each step echoing like punctuation marks on a sentence that had already been written. The cameras followed her, tracking her retreat until she disappeared behind the curtain. A moment later, studio door closed. The sound echoed like a final curtain drop. Silence lingered. Piers exhaled, adjusted his tie, and slowly sat back down behind the desk. The transformation was immediate. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced once more by professional composure. He looked straight into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said evenly, as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred, "I believe that just about sums it up." Gave a small, controlled nod. "We'll be back after the break." For a split second, nothing happened. Then the studio erupted into stunned applause, loud, chaotic, almost cathartic. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers at home staring at their reflections, replaying the moment in their minds. What they had just witnessed wasn't simply an interview gone wrong. It was a collision between control and challenge, narrative and scrutiny, image and accountability. And now the question belonged to the audience. Did Piers go too far? Or was Meghan's attitude her own undoing? We want to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this unforgettable moment and want more stories like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic behind-the-scenes showdowns, exclusive interviews, and the stories nobody else dares. To tell dot and turn on the notification bell because you won't want to miss the next moment when the mask slips. The tension snaps and the truth walks out the door.